All right. Well, I hope everyone was able to make it into the virtual open house. If you're just joining us, welcome. My name is Basil Kitmido, and I'm the City of Tacoma's project manager on the South 56th Street and Cirque Drive Corridor Improvement Project, Phase 2. Today, the team and I will provide you with an update on the project, including project details. Finally, we do have some other members of the project team who are available to provide further details when needed during the Q&A session. I'm now going to get into some of the housekeeping items as we're about to start the presentation. But before we do, I wanted to let participants know that their audio and video are on mute. So the presenters cannot hear or see any of you. However, we are here to answer your questions. So if you have a question about the project, click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and your question will be sent to Tina Dunn from the City of Tacoma's Public Works Department. She'll be reading your questions to me during the Q&A portion of this event. If you called in and are only listening on your phone, please feel free to go to the project website at thecityoftacoma.org / and then all one word, South 56th Street, with South spelled out and a TH after the numbers 56. From there, you can find my contact info and submit questions to my email or call me after this presentation. And I believe we will have the website posted in the chat momentarily. And please note this open house is being recorded, and the video and the summary of all the questions and answers will be posted to the website. That will occur likely sometime next week. So you can look out for that there. So with that, we'll begin to share the presentation screen with you and begin the city's portion of the presentation. Please bear with us as we do this. This virtual open house venue is new for all of us. Thank you. Again, I'd like to welcome everyone who has just joined us. My name again is Basil Kitmido, and this is the South 56th Street and Cirque Drive Corridor Improvement Project, Phase 2, virtual open house. Presenting this project with me is Brian Wang with Public Works. He's the design engineer. There's also Liz Castor, Public Works Active Transportation Coordinator, and Troy Stevens, the Public Works Real Estate Specialist. All right. They'll be helping me present the different sections of this presentation. Next slide. In today's presentation, I'll be giving an overview of the project, covering general project info as well as the budget and schedule for the project. From there, we will transition to the project design portion of the presentation with Brian and Liz, where Brian will be discussing the improvements on South 56th Street and other areas, and Liz will cover bicycle facilities, which will provide a great connection between two transit centers in the South Tacoma area. From there, Troy will discuss the right-of-way process we went through for acquiring or getting permission to enter a private property along the corridor so the project's construction can be completed with all the necessary permissions and land. To finish off the presentation, I'll be covering what to expect during construction. We'll then conclude the open house with a Q&A session. Next slide, please. The South 56th Street and Cirque Drive Improvement Project includes 3 phases. Shown in this slide are the Phase 1 and Phase 2 portions of the project. Phase 1 construction was completed in 2018, and Phase 3 at this point has been completed as well. Phase 3 is not shown on the slide because it's within University Place along Cirque Drive and it is not a part of Tacoma. This presentation will mainly focus on Phase 2, which is fully funded and extends from South Washington Street to Tacoma Mall Boulevard in the east and west direction. In the north and south direction, the project will extend from South 47th Street at the Pierce Transit Bus Station near the mall to South 58th Street at the South Tacoma Transit Station. The majority of the improvements will be focused on South 56th Street, which corresponds to the lowest horizontal blue line shown in the map. Brian, the city's design engineer, will discuss the street improvements along South 86th Street in just a few slides. The remaining portions of the blue line encompass the new active transportation or bike route, which connect the South Tacoma Sounder Transit Station to the Pierce Transit bus station at the mall. Liz will be discussing this portion of the design in a few slides as well. Next slide, please. Next, I'll be going into the schedule. The design of the phase 2, as I mentioned, has been ongoing, and we anticipate the completion by the end of this year for design. From there, we anticipate advertising the project in early winter 2021. Phase 2 construction is expected to begin late spring or early summer 2021. The duration will be about a whole year. However, the impacts will not be as long to the whole project corridor as we expect or anticipate the contractor tackling the project in pieces rather than all at once. I'll go into the budget now. The design of phase 2 has been ongoing for a number of years. Prior to 2016, the construction was not funded. However, now, after 2016, we had received some federal grant opportunity. We were awarded the funding from the Puget Sound Regional Council because of the project's improvements to local and regional mobility. Construction of the phase 2 is estimated to cost around $8.3 million. The federal grant the city received covers approximately $7 million of that. The city is providing an additional $1.3 million of funding from the Streets Initiative funds, which is a voter-approved initiative to provide funding for city streets repairs and improvements. The Streets Initiative funding was included in this project as a form of leverage to pursue the grant initially, and which is done for other projects of this size as well. The Streets Initiative funds are also meant to offer the required match to receive the federal grant funding and to cover construction costs. That's the conclusion of my first portion of this presentation. I hope that participants are using the Q&A button to submit questions that they might be having as we go along through this, and we'll get to those questions shortly. I'm now going to pass the presentation over to Brian Wang, our project design engineer, who will discuss and provide details on the South 56th Street improvements of the project. Brian, if you could please unmute yourself, we can start your portion of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Basil. Hello, everyone. As Basil mentioned, my name is Brian Wang. I am the project engineer for this project. I'll be going over the project scope in a little bit more detail. So as Basil mentioned, the main portion of the improvements are happening on South 56th Street from Washington to Tacoma Mall Boulevard. So for this section, we will be improving the entire ADA pedestrian network. We will be installing ADA compliant sidewalks, driveways, and curb ramps, as well as improving the existing bus stops to be ADA compliant as well. We will be constructing new pedestrian signal improvements at signalized intersections. These include pedestrian push buttons, new pedestrian signal heads where needed, and illumination and street lighting to help improve visibility at these intersections where needed. You can see an example of one of these curb ramps with push buttons and pedestrian signal heads would look like. An example is in the photo. That is at South 19th Street. We recently just installed that, and it's a very similar corridor to South 56th Street. Next slide. We will also be resurfacing the entire roadway from Washington to Tacoma Mall Boulevard. All existing asphalt will receive a grind and overlay. A grind and overlay is where we remove the top few inches of existing asphalt, and we place down the exact amount of asphalt that we removed, and that creates a new driving surface as well as improves the overall strength of that roadway as well. We will be removing and replacing all of the concrete pavement as well. There will be new curb and gutter installed as necessary. along the entire corridor, such as to install these new ramps, the driveways, and any locations where curb and gutter is damaged. There is a sanitary main replacement that has been requested by our Environmental Services Department. This is located between Puget Sound Avenue and Warner Street. The average depth of the sanitary main is about 13 feet deep, and we will be replacing that exactly where it's at right now. And lastly, there is no lane change configuration, no change in the lane configuration along South 56th Street. Next slide. So along with the improvements that we're doing at South 56th Street, we will also be doing a few more improvements as well. So we will be doing some bicycle accommodations connecting the South Tacoma Sounder Station and Tacoma Mall Transit Centers. We will go into that in a little bit more detail with Liz in a few slides. There will be some project-wide parking changes, primarily along Washington Street. Due to the lane configuration on Washington Street, the current parking along Washington Street will need to be organized to comply with current parking standards. This will result in some parking reductions along Washington from 56th to 58th Street to 54th Street. We will be installing intersignal communications where needed, grid smart camera detection on South 54th Street to accommodate bike lanes. And at South 47th, primarily at South 47th and Oaks, we will be doing some additional pedestrian improvements such as curb ramps, pedestrian push buttons, and pedestrian signal heads as needed there as well. That concludes my slides, and I would like to pass this on to Liz to discuss the active transportation as it relates to this and the proposed bicycle accommodations. Liz?
All right. Thank you, Brian. So I'm Liz Castor. I am a senior planner in the Public Works Department and also the city's active transportation coordinator. So today I'm going to start high level, talk about what our transportation policies say and how we make planning and design decisions. Brian already shared information on pedestrian improvements along South 56th Street, and I'll be sharing the specifics of what bike facilities are planned as part of the project. I'll wrap up by showing how this project fits in with Tacoma's bikeway network overall. So just a reminder, if you have a question about this project, please click that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So starting with the big picture, a quick overview of what policies guide our decision-making around active transportation. We have the Transportation Master Plan. So that gives us our overarching transportation policies, including our green transportation hierarchy, which prioritizes safety and access for people using active transportation and transit. Our Transportation Master Plan also outlines our planned transportation network for all modes of transportation. The city also has what's called a Complete Streets Ordinance, which requires city staff to consider all modes in our transportation projects. And modes meaning ways that people get around. So whether that's walking or bicycling, using a scooter, skateboard, things like that. Recently, City Council passed a Vision Zero resolution. So that sets a goal to eliminate deaths and serious injuries from traffic crashes by the year 2035. So that just reaffirms the importance of focusing on safety in all of our projects. The city also has a number of policies related to equity and undoing institutional racism. These policies go beyond transportation, but in our realm as the Public Works Department, we are dedicated to addressing the disparities we see in transportation safety and access. So as you can see from the photos of the Pipeline and Prairie Line Trail, we have some fantastic places to walk and bicycle in Tacoma, but not all neighborhoods and communities have equal access to places for people of all ages and abilities to safely walk and roll. So we're working to change that, and I think this project is a great example of a step in the right direction. Next slide. So the policies I just mentioned provide the foundation of why we plan for active transportation. When it comes to prioritizing active transportation projects, selecting routes, and developing design, city staff, along with stakeholders like our volunteer bicycle pedestrian technical advisory group, focus on three main themes: equity, safety, and connectivity. The City of Tacoma has an equity index that looks at access to opportunity across the city. We use this data to help us prioritize infrastructure investments. According to the Equity Index, the neighborhood surrounding this project is more racially diverse, lower income, and includes a higher percentage of individuals with disabilities than the city as a whole. In Pierce County, low-income individuals are more likely to bicycle and take transit than higher-income folks. Walking rates are consistently high across income levels. While that survey didn't include race and ethnicity, national data indicates that people of color are more likely to walk and bike than white folks. While we're working to make all of our streets safe and accessible for walking and rolling, we prioritize investments in neighborhoods like South Tacoma, where we see greater disparities in safety and access. As part of our analysis, we also look at safety data like crash history and design our infrastructure to improve the safety of all users. Connectivity is also a key consideration. We look for opportunities to fill gaps in our transportation network and create safe routes for folks to access jobs, transit, schools, local businesses, parks, and daily destinations. So the next slide, you'll see a map which shows that this project connects the South Tacoma Sounder Station, the South Tacoma Business District, the Water Flume Line Trail, and the Tacoma Mall Transit Center. As I mentioned, Brian highlighted the pedestrian infrastructure planned on 56th Street. I'm going to quickly run through what types of infrastructure are planned for each street segment. We'll start here so you can all kind of see how it all fits together. As we go through each segment, I will start in the southwest corner at the South Tacoma Sounder Station, and we'll end up in the northeast corner at the Tacoma Mall Transit Center. So on the next slide, we'll see a plan design for South Washington Street from 58th Street, where we tie into existing bike lanes, to 56th Street. We've got a two-way parking protected bike lane, also known as a cycle track, on the west side of the street. These will be Tacoma's first parking protected bike lanes, which means that instead of having vehicles park against the curb, the parking lane is placed between moving vehicles and bicyclists as an added buffer and protection. We will use green paint at the driveways to identify potential conflict points. On the next slide, you will see we then transition to one-way parking protected bike lanes from 56th to 54th. This is also on Washington Street. So on the next slide, we've got 54th Street. It's the longest east-west segment of our bike facility. From Washington to the Water Flume Line Trail, we've got traditional bike lanes with parking curbside. In the next segment, we continue along 54th past the Water Flume Line Trail, which then transitions to Railroad Street. We've got shared lane markings, also known as sharrows. Sharrows are also included north-south on 5th Street and south 48th for one block. These markings reinforce that this is a shared street and bicyclists may use the full lane. On the next slide, we'll come back to our overview map just so you can follow along to where we are. So now that brings us to the corner of South 48th and Oaks. If you want to go to the next slide, we've got a two-way cycle track on the east side of the road. This segment will be protected with a bolt-in kind of rubberized curbing. So you can see in the bottom right-hand photo there what that can look like in the field. And then finally on the next slide, we've got an 8 to 12 foot shared use path on the south side of the road on South 47th. This will connect into the Tacoma Mall Transit Center. So next slide, now that we've talked about how this project offers a lot of great connectivity to the business district, Water Flume Line Trail, transit, and so on, I want to wrap up with a quick look about how this project links into our bikeway network overall. So all of the solid lines on this map show existing bikeways, mostly in Tacoma, with a little University Place in the west and a little unincorporated Pierce County in the east. And the callouts point to dotted lines, and that shows other funded projects our team is working on. So probably the most relevant to this project is the missing segment of the Water Flume Line Trail, which will connect from the bike lanes on South Tacoma Way to downtown. So those are both funded next phases. We've also got planned bike lane connections to trails on South Mildred Street and South 15th Street, and a cycle track on South 64th from McKinley to Pacific. Altogether, these projects contribute to building out our connected bikeway network. So now I'm going to pass this over to Troy Stevens with the City of Tacoma Public Works Department, who will provide more details on the right-of-way for this project.
Thank you, Liz. It's a pleasure to be here today with everyone. Yes, my name is Troy Stevens, and I'm with the Public Works Real Property Services Group. And in Real Property Services, we manage the city's streets and alleys. Now, most of what you've seen today from both Brian and Liz, those improvements happen in the right of way or plan to be in the right of way. But you might be asking yourself, well, what happens if my property is needed for part of this project? Well, you'll be happy to know that for the last year, Real Property Services has been working with the affected property owners in the project to acquire any additional rights of way that we possibly needed. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit in the slides here and show you what right of way looks like. Now, you'll notice on this slide that there are these heavy blue lines. The heavy blue lines are the property lines, and the area in between is the right of way. You can also see that on the next screen. You can see the roadways and the heavy blue lines. The area in between is the right of way. And that's the areas that Real Property Services, in conjunction with engineering, we've been working together to acquire these additional rights of way that we needed. Now, what governs this is something called the LAGS manual, which is the state, and the Uniform Act, which is the federal codes. We work within these two code sections and with these agencies to make sure that we follow the rules to keep everyone safe, or to negotiate safely, or and make sure that we follow the rules of acquisition. We do things like appraise the property. We have forms that are reviewed, letters, easements that are all reviewed by the state to make sure that we're all following the rules in these property acquisitions. Now you might be saying, well, what are you acquiring? Well, on South 56, types of property from private property owners. And these sections were relatively small in comparison. No one's entire property was bought as part of this road project. What typically happens is we're acquiring a little bit of extra property for an ADA ramp or to build a wall. So what happens with the temporary construction easements is we'll oftentimes need just a little sliver, maybe 2 feet behind the sidewalk. So between that blue line, that heavy property line, and the sidewalk. So we'll sometimes need to acquire a small area like that to allow our construction teams to build the sidewalks that they need, or to reconstruct an ADA ramp. The dedication deeds, the reason that we acquire those is that if there's a section of someone's property that we need to not just temporarily occupy, but permanently, we'll get a deed or a right-of-way dedication deed. And we didn't have that many on this project. Most of our acquisitions were, and those will just last for the term of the construction. Now, there is one other type of document that we sometimes need, and currently we're not negotiating any, and that's the driveway reconstruction permits. And what typically happens with a driveway reconstruction permit is during construction, the engineers realize that, for instance, a car might bottom out on a driveway, or there's some feathering that needs to happen, something unexpected when the project was being engineered. That's when we get the temporary rights. But for the most part, we don't foresee needing any additional property rights. We've acquired the 24 separate rights that we needed on this project, and it's all gone really well. We've been working with a contractor to acquire those property rights, and we're currently working now with the state, because we've acquired all the property, to get the project certified, which will allow us to move on into the construction phase of the project. So again, just to recap, we're working within the bigger Uniform Act, which is the federal code. We work with the state. It has something called the LAGS manual, or local agency guidelines. We follow all those rules to make sure that the process is uniform and the property owners are treated fairly. And we acquired 2 different types of property rights: the temporary construction easements and the right-of-way dedications. And hopefully we won't need any driveway reconstructions, but in case we do, you will talk to the property owners as those come up, but we don't foresee any at this time. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Basil. Basil?
Thanks, Troy. And thank you, Brian and Liz, for your portions of the presentation. Oh, next slide, please, Troy. Thank you. As mentioned before, the duration of the project is approximately 1 year long. The overall mobility in the corridor will remain intact, although there will be some inconveniences like delays, pedestrian detours, and/or lane closures. These can all be expected during construction. Troy, previous slide, please. The city expects that the contractor will maintain 2 ways of traffic, if I haven't mentioned that already. And once this project is complete, the improvements will provide an upgraded facilities for all types of transportation. In terms of the communications with the community, the communication of the project will come in various forms and will mainly be needed along South 56th Street and South 47th Street, where physical construction tasks are located. You'll get project postcard notifications when construction is scheduled to begin. And that will come before the construction, and will be sent out as soon as possible once we know the schedule. And then there will also be on-street reader boards that will be placed in areas where the construction is about to start. In addition, there will be a city inspector on site to watch over the contractor and to provide a point of contact for the public in case there are any issues. There's also a website for the project, as I mentioned before, which some of you have already seen. You'll be able to find updates on the project's progress there, and you can check in whenever you would like. And if you have any questions while at the website, you can find my contact there in case anyone needs to reach me. In terms of the coordination with traffic, the contractor will be using traffic control plans reviewed and approved by the city. The temporary traffic control provisions and the traffic control plans will ultimately try to balance construction needs, overall construction time, and disruptions to all modes of traffic during the project. Temporary access closures will possibly be needed to construct some of the project improvements, and this is a part of the inconveniences at points. One instance is with driveways and where driveways will be reconstructed. In these instances and other similar instances, the disruptions to a driveway will be coordinated with the affected parties in advance. When access closures are needed, the contractor will notify the city and then coordinate directly with the affected parties. We anticipate working with the contractor as well as the affected parties to find the most opportune times and methods to do the work. Also, the contractor will be required to provide temporary road signage that will let folks know that businesses are open during construction and will be located along the roadway when possible. One last item is coordination with garbage and other services in the community. The contractor will be required to coordinate with the various services in the area so as to avoid any disruptions. I'd also like to add that because of the reorganization of the parking on South Washington Street between 54th and 58th Street, the city will be reaching out to the South Tacoma Business District to set up additional meetings to discuss the street's reorganization. Once again, the phase 2 construction is anticipated for late spring, early summer of 2021. If you'd like updates or to make the city aware of any concerns during the project, you can call or send a message to me, as I mentioned previously. Next slide, please. On this next slide, we have included our contact information in case there are any additional questions for us after the presentation. The presentation slides will also be available on our website in case you'd like to look back at it. Next slide, please. That concludes the presentation, and we are now going to go into the Q&A portion of the open house. Although we will be answering the questions live, we will provide our answers on the website in written form. We're going to start with some questions that we received via email before this event, and please continue to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to submit questions during the Q&A session and this event.
Okay, thanks, Basil. I'm going to go ahead and read off the questions that we received previously. And so far, we have received 4 questions
Okay.
through the Q&A button below.
Okay.
And in light and respect of everybody's time, I'm going to keep a watch on the clock to make sure that we end on time today. So first question came from Andrew Babcock. He's the owner of Edison City Ale House at South 56th Street and South Lawrence Street. He wonders if you could speak to the kind of accommodations that will be made to ensure that access to their business remains in place for the patrons.
Sure. Yeah. You know, as I mentioned in the slide, we'll be working with any sort of access closures with the contractor and the affected parties. And in the project specification, the contractor is required to do the following to protect the rights of the budding property owners. And the first one is to conduct construction so that the least inconveniences, the least inconvenience as possible is caused to abutting property owners. Next, they'll have to maintain ready access to driveways, houses, and buildings along the line of work. They'll also have to provide temporary approaches to crossing or intersecting roads and keep these approaches in good condition. And finally, they'll have to provide another access before closing any existing ones whenever the contract calls for removing and replacing an abutting owner's access. But we'll be trying to work with you know, the businesses and the property owners to make sure that access is available for themselves and for their patrons.
Okay, thank you. They would also like to know, will they be provided ample notice of any sidewalk or road closures that will affect their business?
Yes, we will notify the person or the affected parties notifications directly with and we'll be working with them directly with the contractor to make sure that you know, that the least amount of inconvenience is realized. You know, there will be some sort of delays and inconveniences, as I mentioned previously in the slides, but we'll be doing our best to make sure that these are kept to a minimum.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
This one comes from Lacey Gertis. So no lane changes like when you took out the center lane down on 56th and put in bike lanes? I'm asking because the change has made it dangerous for drivers.
That is correct. There will be no changes to the actual 56th Street corridor. There will be any bike lanes down that area.
Okay. In the 56th Street block west of Junit Street, water can build up in the south gutter. Will you ensure slope and catch basins work? Will you ensure slope and catch basins work well to successfully drain the roadway? This comes from John Miles.
Thank you, John, for the question. I'm going to pass this off to Brian, our design engineer, and he can talk a little bit more to that. Brian, if you'll unmute yourself, I'll unmute myself.
Hi, thanks for the question. Yes, we will be ensuring that there's no ponding that occurs. You know, it's tough to know when this happens, even with our survey, especially because our survey might say that it's, you know, it does have a slope, but we are replacing grates on most catch basins in coordination with ES. So we've gone out, reviewed every catch basin, reviewed all the grates to make sure that they're either working or not working so great. So we will be replacing catch basins that are damaged or faulty or not working well, replacing grates when they're not catching water efficiently. And if we miss a ponding location in the plans, our inspectors are great at making sure that those get rectified during construction. And so I will personally look into the 56th Street just to make sure that it's covered in the plan set. But if not, our inspectors during construction are great at catching these issues and making sure that they get rectified then as well.
I have another one from John. The
Great,
5-lane
thank you, Brian.
configuration of South 56th Street and the lack of sidewalk separation creates a very poor pedestrian experience. Is there anything you will do to improve this?
I will pass this off to Brian once again and have him or let him answer John's question. And thank you, John, for submitting the question.
Hi. So this is Brian again, and to speak to this, so based on our Tacoma Transportation Master Plan, you know, we did a corridor study on this network and determined how many lanes were necessary. And so we are limited to what we have within the right-of-way in terms of how much space we have for expanding sidewalks. But with that in mind, we have, it was my goal to make sidewalks as wide as possible up and down this corridor. So I have gone through every single section and just made sure that I've created the widest sidewalk, but we are limited to, I know there's a lot of very close right-of-way to our existing, to the existing sidewalks. And so we're a little bit limited there, but I have made sure to make the sidewalks as wide as possible to help make it a little bit more comfortable and a little safer for the pedestrians.
Great, thank you, Brian.
Actually, if we could go back to Lacey Jarvis's question. It looks like Brennan Kidd, one of our engineers, has a little bit more detail that he can provide to her question.
Sure, Brett.
Yes, yes, I sure can. Yeah, I wanted to get back to Lacey's question and just give a little more detail. So there was a project-funded corridor study that was conducted by a consultant prior to phase one of this project that looked at the entire corridor, which included collection of traffic data and review of roadway conditions. The study considered existing and future traffic volumes, travel time along the corridor, including the number of side street and access points for the various segments of the corridor, and then also safety along the corridor. So with the limited right-of-way that we have to accommodate the competing entrance, mode interests and space that we have to work with, and also not desiring to necessarily impact abutting property owners' frontages with excess widening or unneeded widening. The study determined that between Orchard and Tyler, which was basically the phase one of this project, that 2 travel lanes in each direction along with bike lanes could be accommodated by removing that center turn lane. And yes, that does mean that, you know, left turns onto side streets or into driveways do have to make that turn from a shared lane, one of the 2 through lanes in each direction. East of Tyler Street and for the remainder of the phase 2 project, the number of streets and access points and overall increase in activity within this business district area that's centered on South Tacoma Way did not support continuing that same lane configuration. And as a result, the city actually had to work with the granting authority to make sure that we could get some bike-related improvements along the parallel route, which Liz mentioned, which is along South 54th Street, and then also those north-south connections between the transit center and the Sounder Station. We one follow-up thing again for the safety-related aspect. So phase 1 was completed about 2 years ago, and that's about the minimum amount of time that we would like to have for people getting used to the new configuration and kind of getting settled in. And so we are due to look at both the before and after case of what's happening with traffic along that section, that phase 1 section from Orchard to Tyler, to ensure that the conclusions and the recommendations from that study are not creating an adverse safety condition.
Thank you, Brennan. We have another question that came in from Richard Gardner. He asks, any expected utility pole relocation and or fire hydrants?
I don't believe that we are expecting any utility pole relocations. And I recall looking into this previously, and I don't think there's any fire hydrant relocations, but I think Brian might have a little bit more to add to this. Brian?
I just wanted to confirm that there are no utility pole relocations and no fire hydrant relocations as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. And another one from John Miles. I wonder if anything can be done about the tents on the lower Flume Line Trail near the Tacoma Avenue Bridge over South Tacoma Way. I understand this isn't part of your project.
Thanks, John. Right now at the city, we have a homeless outreach team that can offer support to you and other individuals experiencing homelessness and address community concerns. If there are specific areas of concern, like the Water Flume Line Trail, you can share those locations with the city's 311 team. You can call 311 from anywhere in the city of Tacoma, or you can also dial 253-591-5000 from anywhere else. You can also try sending an email to csc@cityoftacoma.org, or also csc@ci.tacoma.wa.us. So I hope that helps you with some resources to address that if you'd like to in now or the future. And hopefully that answers your question for now.
Thank you, Basil. So we have one more that came in previously. This may not be a question for you, but can you speak to any future plans to better enforce the speed limit or lower the speed limit in between Washington Street and Tacoma Mall Boulevard? We have been plagued with aggressive driving problems for years, and it seems to only be a matter of time before the serious accident happens in the vicinity of our business.
Thanks, Tina, and thank you, Andrew, for submitting the question. I'm going to pass this question off to Brennan Kidd to help out with filling in with that. So, Brennan?
Yep, sure thing, Basil. Yeah, it's a great question, and certainly safety is one of the city's priorities. Changing the speed limit and changing signs to say this is what we would like you to drive only has so much effect and really little effect. There really has to be a fundamental change in the environment of the roadway and the configuration, which granted this project is doing some of that, but not to the degree where we would be able to effectively change or lower the speed limit and actually have people comply with it. To do so without those kind of complementary changes would basically be setting people up to violate the speed limit when the roadway condition is going to make them feel like they should be traveling faster. Alternatives to try and get those driver behaviors addressed is through either the Tacoma Police Department with their community liaison officers that are assigned to certain areas of the city, and so there's a specific sector that would cover this area, or possibly two sectors. They would also have a vested interest in trying to address those concerns because there is a business district that is centered on this corridor and along South Tacoma Way. Additionally, the city has initiated a Vision Zero program, which is going to be looking at kind of systemic changes to how the city's transportation network and how to address things that cause safety concerns and try and get serious and fatal injuries reduced to zero by the year 2035. So that program is just getting started, but that'll be another opportunity that's going to be looking citywide at these same kind of concerns.
Excellent. Thank you, Brennan.
Thank you. That's all we have for now. If anybody else has anything else, if you want to type away, we have a couple more minutes.
Yeah, I guess in the remaining time, I'd like to just kind of emphasize some points that at the city we're going to be trying to minimize the inconveniences and disruptions to the community along South 56th Street and other areas of the improvements that we'll have. Also, if there are any other questions, you can certainly reach me via phone or via email with the contact information that you can find at the website. I'm pretty sure I saw that in the chat there had been some posts of the website as well as some additional information regarding how to contact our homelessness team at the city. And yeah, we are expecting the project to be going to construction in late spring, early summer of 2021. We're pretty excited about this at the city, and yeah, we're looking forward to getting this work implemented and get the improvements installed. And I think that's pretty much all that I've got for now. Unless if anyone else would like to add something, we can end this a little bit early and let people get to their lunch hours. And I would like to also just say that I really appreciate everyone joining in today and providing the questions and answers throughout this presentation or throughout this Q&A session. And I want to thank my fellow colleagues for presenting with me and providing the information to the community today. So I think at that, we will, I guess, politely end this meeting. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. And please feel free to contact me if there is any questions or concerns. Thank you.